As the judges began their rounds, students stood nervously beside their displays. Near the center of the gymnasium, Blake Harrison, son of tech entrepreneur Gregory Harrison, stood confidently next to his project on quantum computing applications. His display featured a professional-grade interactive touchscreen and custom-printed materials that reportedly cost his father over $3,000 to produce. Next to Blake's project, Sophia Chen presented her work on CRISPR gene editing technology, complete with 3D printed models and a video demonstration created with help from her mother, a biochemistry professor. Morgan watched from her position in the last row as judges moved methodically from the center projects outward. Her display, constructed from repurposed materials found around the farm and the local hardware store, seemed increasingly inadequate with each passing minute. Yet behind her simple presentation board lay months of research, experimentation, and innovative thinking. Her project, titled Sustainable Irrigation Systems Using Atmospheric Water Harvesting, had grown from a very real problem facing her family's farm. After 3 consecutive years of drought had threatened their livelihood, Morgan had become obsessed with finding affordable solutions for small-scale farmers. Using materials available on most farms, she had designed and built a prototype system that extracted moisture from air, concentrated it, and distributed it efficiently to crops during dry periods. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Morgan's father, James Chambers, had wanted to attend the science fair to support his daughter, but spring planting couldn't wait. "You show them what farm kids can do," he had told her that morning, his weathered hands squeezing her shoulders affectionately. "Your ideas solve real problems, not just theoretical ones." As the judging progressed, Morgan noticed Dr. Kensington's expression shifting from polite interest to poorly concealed boredom as he moved through projects in the outer circles. When he finally reached her table, nearly an hour after judging began, his body language suggested he was merely going through the motions. "Ms. Chambers," he said, glancing at her name tag rather than making eye contact, "please explain your project." Morgan straightened her posture and took a deep breath. "My project explores atmospheric water harvesting techniques adapted for small-scale agricultural applications," she began, her voice clear despite her nerves. "Using a modified condensation system combined with passive solar collection methods, I've created a sustainable irrigation solution that can help family farms survive increasingly unpredictable rainfall patterns." She gestured to her homemade prototype, constructed from PVC pipes, recycled plastic sheets, copper coiling, and a small solar panel salvaged from a broken garden light. "This system can extract up to 2 gallons of water daily from ambient air, even in relatively low humidity conditions. For comparison, that's enough to sustain 20 square feet of vegetable crops through moderate drought conditions." Dr. Kensington examined the device with obvious skepticism, his mouth forming a slight frown. "And this is constructed from, household materials?" "Yes, sir," Morgan replied, enthusiasm momentarily overcoming her nervousness. "That's a key aspect of the design. Most small farms operate on tight margins, so affordability is essential. This entire system costs less than $80 to build using widely available materials." Dr. Kensington made a non-committal noise as he jotted something on his clipboard. "And your background research? Which scientific journals did you consult?" Morgan handed him a folder containing her research notes. "I reviewed 23 papers on atmospheric water generation, though most focus on large-scale applications. I also incorporated traditional farming knowledge about dew collection that my grandfather taught me, which isn't in scientific journals, but has historical precedent across multiple agricultural societies. at the mention of traditional farming. Knowledge. Dr. Kensington's eyebrows rose slightly. The two other judges exchanged glances. Morgan noticed several nearby students from wealthy families smirking behind their hands. Ms. Chambers, Dr. Kensington said, his tone shifting to one of condescension, thinly veiled as academic concern. Science fairs of this caliber typically showcase cutting-edge research based on established scientific methodologies, not folk wisdom. Heat rose to Morgan's cheeks, but she persisted. The traditional techniques informed my approach, but I validated everything with controlled experiments. The data shows a 34% improvement in water collection efficiency over standard atmospheric water harvesters when my modifications are applied. Dr. Kensington handed back her research folder without opening it. While your enthusiasm is commendable, this project lacks the sophisticated technological foundation we expect at Westridge. Science is about pushing boundaries in established fields, not cobbling together homemade contraptions based on anecdotal methods. By now, a small crowd had gathered around Morgan's table, attracted by Dr. Kensington's dismissive tone. Among them was Blake Harrison, whose expression fluctuated between amusement and pity. Perhaps next year, Dr. Kensington continued, his voice loud enough to be heard by nearby students, you might consider partnering with a peer who has access to proper laboratory facilities. Science requires precision equipment and established methodologies, not improvised solutions based on farm experience. A wave of muffled laughter rippled through the gathered students. Morgan stood frozen, her face burning with humiliation, as Dr. Kensington moved to the next table, already engaging the next student with renewed interest. Principal Richardson, who had been observing from a distance, approached Morgan's table after the judges moved on. Her expression was a carefully constructed mask of administrative concern. Miss Chambers, she said quietly, we appreciate your participation. Remember that Westridge Academy maintains certain standards for scientific inquiry. Perhaps Dr. Kensington's suggestion about collaboration would be worth considering for future events. As the principal walked away, Morgan heard Blake Harrison's voice from behind her. Hey, farm girl, maybe next year you can show us how to build a better scarecrow. His friends laughed, not bothering to lower their voices. Morgan stood alone at her table, fighting back tears as she straightened her display materials. The months of early mornings and late nights spent designing, building, and testing her system seemed suddenly foolish in the face of such dismissal. She considered packing up early and calling her mother for a ride home, but something in her refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her retreat. A gentle hand on her shoulder startled Morgan from her thoughts. She turned to find Mrs. Elena Gonzalez, the school librarian, standing beside her. In her mid-60s, Mrs. Gonzalez was beloved by many students for her kindness and wisdom, though she rarely attended school events outside the library. I heard about your project from another student and wanted to see it for myself, Mrs. Gonzalez said warmly. Would you mind explaining it to me? Oh, Morgan hesitated, then nodded, walking Mrs. Gonzalez through her research and demonstration with gradually returning confidence. The librarian listened attentively, asking insightful questions that revealed a surprising knowledge of agricultural challenges. You know, Mrs. Gonzalez said when Morgan finished, my father was a farmer in New Mexico. He would have appreciated practical innovation like this far more than flashy technology with no real-world application. She gestured toward the prototype. May I take a photo of your design? I have a friend who might find it interesting. Morgan nodded, surprised by the request, but grateful for the interest. Mrs. Gonzalez carefully photographed the prototype and Morgan's technical drawings, then squeezed her hand encouragingly. No, don't let them diminish what you've created, she said quietly. Some people are so focused on complexity that they miss the elegance of practical solutions. As the judging concluded and attendees began to gather for the awards ceremony, Morgan stood at the back of the crowd, already knowing the outcome. Sure enough, first place went to Blake Harrison's quantum computing project, with Sophia Chen's gene editing presentation taking second. Third place went to twins Aidan and Emma Winston for their artificial intelligence algorithm that predicted consumer behavior, a project their father's marketing firm had heavily supported. Morgan slipped out before the ceremony ended, gathering her project materials and heading toward the bus stop. As she waited for the rural route bus that would take her to within 2 miles of her family's farm, her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "How did it go, kiddo?" Her fingers hovered over the screen as she considered how to respond. Finally, she typed, "They didn't get it, Dad, but I still believe in it." The reply came almost immediately. "Their loss. We're proud of you no matter what. Dinner will be waiting." On the long bus ride home, Morgan stared out the window at the passing landscape, watching as manicured suburban lawns gradually gave way to open fields and farmland. Despite the humiliation of the day, a small, stubborn part of her refused to accept Dr. Kensington's dismissal. She knew her design worked. She had seen it collect water even during the driest weeks of summer. Her calculations were sound, her testing methodical. By the time she walked the final stretch of road to Sweetwater Farm, the sun was setting behind the weathered barn and silo that had stood for nearly 80 years. The familiar sight restored some of her equilibrium. This was real. The challenges her family and neighbors faced were real, regardless of what Dr. Kensington thought. At dinner, Morgan gave her parents a simplified version of the day's events, downplaying Dr. Kensington's mockery, but acknowledging that her project hadn't been well received. "Those fancy science teachers think real innovation only happens in laboratories with million-dollar equipment," her father said, passing her the mashed potatoes. But some of the most important agricultural advancements came from farmers solving their own problems in their own fields. Her mother, Sarah Chambers, reached across the table to squeeze Morgan's hand. "You've always seen solutions where others see only problems, sweetie. That's a gift, even if those people at Westridge don't recognize it." Later that evening, as Morgan sat on the porch swing watching fireflies appear in the gathering darkness, her phone buzzed with an incoming email. Expecting a message from a classmate, perhaps one offering sympathy or more likely sharing gossip about her humiliation, she almost didn't check it. When she finally did, the sender's address made her sit up straight. E. Martinez Anasa, Gov. The subject line read, "Your atmospheric water harvesting system. Request for information." Morgan stared at the screen, certain it must be a prank, probably Blake and his friends finding one more way to mock her. But as she cautiously opened the email, its content seemed too detailed, too specific to be a simple joke. "Dear Ms. Chambers," the email began, "my name is Dr. Elena Martinez, Lead Environmental Systems Engineer at NASA's Sustainable Habitation Research Division. Your atmospheric water harvesting system was brought to my attention by my mother, Elena Gonzalez, who works as a librarian at your school." Morgan's breath caught. Mrs. Gonzalez was Dr. Martinez's mother? The email continued. "I was particularly impressed by your innovative adaptation of passive collection techniques and the system's minimal energy requirements. As you may know, NASA is currently developing life support systems for long-duration space missions and potential habitation modules for lunar and Martian applications. Water reclamation and generation are critical challenges in these environments. Your approach to maximizing water collection with minimal resources parallels problems we're working to solve, albeit in very different environments. I would like to discuss your design process and results in more detail, if you're willing. Several colleagues and I will be in your area tomorrow for an unrelated matter, and we would be interested in seeing your prototype in person. Would it be possible for us to visit your school tomorrow afternoon to view your project? Please let me know at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Dr. Elena Martinez, Lead Environmental Systems Engineer, NASA Sustainable Habitation Research Division. Attached to the email was Dr. Martinez's official NASA credentials and contact information. Morgan read the message 3 times, her hands trembling slightly. This couldn't be real. NASA engineers interested in her homemade water collection system. It had to be an elaborate prank. Yet something about the technical language and specific interest in aspects of her design that she hadn't even presented at the science fair made her hesitate to dismiss it outright. Only someone with a deep understanding of water reclamation systems would ask about the specific points mentioned in the email. Morgan called out to her parents, who were watching the evening news in the living room. When they joined her on the porch, she wordlessly handed her phone to her mother, who read the email aloud while her father listened, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to cautious hope. Could it be real? Morgan asked when her mother finished reading. Her father took the phone, studying the email carefully. The details look legitimate. NASA does have a Sustainable Habitation Research Division. I read about their work in that farming journal last month. Should I respond? Morgan asked, still half convinced it would turn out to be a cruel joke. Her mother nodded firmly. Absolutely. If it's real, this is an incredible opportunity, and if it's someone's idea of a prank, we'll deal with that too. With her parents looking over her shoulder, Morgan composed a careful reply, thanking Dr. Martinez for her interest and confirming that she would be at school the following afternoon with her project reassembled. She provided her contact information, and after a moment's hesitation added that she looked forward to discussing her research with the NASA team. When she finally pressed send, the 3 of them sat in silence on the porch, the weight of possibility hanging in the evening air. Well, her father finally said, whatever happens tomorrow, you should be proud. You created something meaningful. Enough that either NASA is interested or someone went to extraordinary lengths to make it look like they are. Either way, that's saying something. Morgan smiled weakly, but inside her mind was racing. If this was real, if actual NASA engineers were coming to see her project, she needed to be prepared. She spent the next several hours refining her presentation, organizing her research notes, and running final tests on her prototype to ensure everything worked perfectly. It was well past midnight when she finally went to bed, alternating between excitement and dread about what the next day might bring. As she drifted off to sleep, one thought remained clear. Whether Dr. Martinez's email was genuine or an elaborate hoax, Morgan would face tomorrow with the same determination and dignity that had carried her through years of being the farm girl in a school full of suburban privilege. The morning dawned clear and unusually warm for early spring. Morgan awoke before her alarm, her mind immediately flooding with thoughts of the day ahead. She dressed carefully in her best clothes, clean jeans, a pressed button-down shirt, and the one pair of nice shoes she owned, and double-checked her project materials before her father drove her to school. "Remember," James Chambers said as they approached Westridge Academy, Morgan's prototype secured in the truck bed, "no matter what happens today, you stand tall. You know your work has value, regardless of what anyone at this school thinks." Morgan nodded, giving her father a quick hug before gathering her materials. "I'll call you when I know more," she promised, watching as he drove away, the old pickup looking distinctly out of place among the luxury vehicles in the school parking lot. The school day passed in a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Morgan had emailed Dr. Martinez that she would set up her project in the science lab after classes ended at 3:15 p.m. Between classes, she caught snippets of conversation about yesterday's science fair, including several jokes at her expense. Blake Harrison seemed particularly pleased with himself as he recounted Dr. Kensington's dismissal of the farm girls' garden project to appreciative laughter from his friends. By the time the final bell rang, Morgan's confidence had begun to waver again. What if this was an elaborate prank orchestrated by Blake or another student? What if she went to the science lab and found them waiting to mock her further? Worse, what if no one showed up at all, leaving her waiting foolishly for NASA engineers who never existed? Still, something in her refused to give up without seeing this through. She made her way to the science lab and began setting up her prototype. On the large demonstration table at the front of the room, Mrs. Gonzalez appeared shortly after, her kind smile offering reassurance. "My daughter was quite impressed with your work," the librarian said, as she helped Morgan arrange her materials. "Elena has always had an eye for practical innovation." "So, it's really true?" Morgan asked hesitantly. "Your daughter actually works for NASA?" Mrs. Gonzalez nodded, her expression warm with maternal pride. "For 15 years now, she was always fascinated by systems that sustain life, how plants grow, how water cycles, how people survive in challenging environments. Not so different from you, I think." This simple confirmation eased some of Morgan's tension. At least the email hadn't been a complete fabrication. Whether Dr. Martinez would actually appear with NASA colleagues remained to be seen, but the foundation of the story appeared genuine. At 3:30 p.m., Principal Richardson entered the science lab, her expression a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "Ms. Chambers," she said, "I understand you're expecting visitors from NASA this afternoon." Morgan nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "Yes, ma'am. Dr. Elena Martinez and some colleagues expressed interest in my atmospheric water harvesting system." Principal Richardson's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. And you have confirmation of this visit?" "My daughter confirmed it this morning," Mrs. Gonzalez interjected smoothly. "Elena asked that the school accommodate their visit, which should be within the hour." Principal Richardson looked momentarily taken aback by Mrs. Gonzalez's involvement, but recovered quickly. "Well, in that case, I should be present to greet them. Westridge Academy has a long history of producing students who go on to work with prestigious organizations like NASA." By 3:45 p.m., word had somehow spread throughout the school. Dr. Kensington appeared, adjusting his tie and surveying Morgan's reassembled project with newly critical eyes. "You might have mentioned your NASA connections during judging, Ms. Chambers," he said, his tone suggesting she had somehow been deceptive. "I didn't have any NASA connections until after the science fair, Dr. Kensington," Morgan replied evenly. "Mrs. Gonzalez's daughter saw photos of my project yesterday evening." Dr. Kensington frowned slightly, but said nothing more as other faculty members began filtering into the lab, followed by curious students who positioned themselves near the doorway, whispering among themselves. Blake Harrison pushed his way to the front, his expression wavering between disbelief and concern. At precisely 4 p.m., the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors became audible, growing steadily louder until it was clear that the aircraft was approaching the school. Through the lab windows, Morgan could see a sleek black helicopter bearing the NASA insignia descending toward the school's athletic field, the only open space large enough to accommodate such a landing. The room fell completely silent. Principal Richardson recovered first, smoothing her already immaculate suit jacket. "Well," she said brightly, "let's go greet our distinguished visitors, shall we?" The procession from the science lab to the athletic field had an almost ceremonial quality. Principal Richardson led the way, followed by Dr. Kensington and other administrators, then Morgan and Mrs. Gonzalez, with curious students and faculty trailing behind. By the time they reached the field's edge, the helicopter had landed, its rotors slowing as the side door slid open. 4 individuals emerged, 3 women and 1 man, all wearing NASA flight jackets with various insignia and patches. The woman in the lead, tall with grey streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, broke into a warm smile when she spotted Mrs. Gonzalez. "Mama!" she called, embracing the librarian before turning to Morgan. "And you must be Morgan." "Chambers, I'm Elena Martinez. Thank you for accommodating our visit on such short notice." Morgan shook her hand, momentarily speechless at the reality of NASA officials standing on her school's athletic field because of her science project. Dr. Martinez introduced her colleagues. Dr. Priya Sharma, Environmental Systems Specialist, Dr. James Wong, Agricultural Technology Lead, and Dr. Rebecca Okonkwo, Water Reclamation Engineer. Principal Richardson stepped forward, hand extended. "Dr. Martinez, welcome to Westridge Academy. I'm Principal Evelyn Richardson. We're honored to have NASA representatives visiting our institution. We've always prided ourselves on our exceptional science program." Dr. Martinez shook her hand politely, but kept her focus on Morgan. "We're here specifically to see Ms. Chambers. Atmospheric water harvesting system. My mother's description and the photos she sent indicated some innovative approaches that might have applications for our work." Principal Richardson's smile remained fixed in place, though it no longer reached her eyes. "Of course, Dr. Kensington, our science department head, can escort you to our state-of-the-art laboratory facilities." Dr. Kensington stepped forward, extending his hand with newfound enthusiasm. "Dr. Martinez, a pleasure. I mentored Morgan through her project development. We at Westridge always encourage practical applications of theoretical knowledge." Morgan stared at him in disbelief, but before she could respond, Mrs. Gonzalez interjected smoothly. "I believe Morgan can best explain her own work, given that she designed and built the system herself." Dr. Martinez nodded, her expression revealing that she understood the dynamics at play. "We'd like Morgan to lead the way, if that's acceptable." The group made its way back to the science lab, now crowded with onlookers. Morgan was acutely aware of Blake Harrison and his friends watching from the doorway, their earlier mockery replaced by confused silence. Dr. Kensington hovered anxiously as Morgan positioned herself beside her prototype, drawing a deep breath to steady her nerves. "Thank you for coming," she began, looking directly at the NASA team. "This system was designed to address water scarcity issues for small-scale farming operations with limited resources." As Morgan explained her project, the NASA engineers listened intently, occasionally exchanging glances or nodding appreciatively. Dr. Sharma knelt to examine the condensation mechanism, while Dr. Wong inspected the solar collection component. Dr. Okonkwo took detailed notes as Morgan described her testing methodology and results. "The key innovation isn't any single component," Morgan explained, growing more confident as she spoke. "It's how they work together as an integrated system, maximizing efficiency while minimizing cost and complexity. Traditional atmospheric water harvesters require significant energy input, but this design leverages passive solar heating and cooling cycles to achieve similar results with minimal external power." Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "The elegant simplicity is precisely what caught my attention. Space habitation modules have severe constraints on power, weight, and complexity. Solutions that can achieve maximum output with minimum input are exactly what we're pursuing." She turned to her colleagues. "The thermal gradient exploitation here is particularly clever, similar to what we've been attempting with the Mars Habitat Water Recovery System, but with a more efficient collection matrix." Dr. Wong ran his hand along the copper coiling. "What inspired this configuration? It's not a standard approach in atmospheric water generation." Morgan hesitated, glancing briefly at Dr. Kensington before answering honestly. My grandfather showed me how dew forms more heavily on certain surfaces and in certain patterns. He could predict where morning dew would be heaviest based on evening conditions. I combined those observations with research on hydrophilic materials and thermal conductivity to maximize the collection surface area while maintaining efficient transfer. Instead of the dismissal such an explanation had received yesterday, Dr. Okonkwo nodded with approval. Indigenous and traditional knowledge often contains sophisticated understanding of natural processes, even without the formalized language of academic science. Combining that observational wisdom with technical research is exactly the kind of integrative thinking we value at NASA. From the doorway, Blake Harrison's expression had transformed from skepticism to stunned disbelief. Dr. Kensington appeared, increasingly uncomfortable, especially when Dr. Martinez asked Morgan directly, "Did you receive much support from your school's science program in developing this?" Before Morgan could formulate a diplomatic response, Mrs. Gonzalez spoke up. "Morgan's project was entirely self-directed, Elena. She designed and built this system independently, drawing on her own research and experience." Dr. Martinez's expression revealed that she understood the subtext. That makes her achievement even more remarkable. After examining the prototype for nearly an hour, asking detailed questions and occasionally suggesting modifications or improvements, Dr. Martinez stepped back and addressed Morgan directly. "Ms. Chambers, your approach demonstrates exactly the kind of innovative problem-solving NASA values. The combination of efficiency, affordability, and adaptability in your design has potential applications not just for space habitation systems, but for our disaster relief initiatives and global water security programs." She glanced at her colleagues, who nodded in agreement before continuing. "We'd like to invite you to present your research at our Sustainable Systems Conference next month at the Johnson Space Center. Additionally, if you're interested, we have a summer internship program for promising young engineers that might be a good fit for someone with your talents." The science lab fell completely silent. Principal Richardson, who had been standing near the door throughout the presentation, stepped forward with a bright smile. "What an honor for Westridge Academy. We've always encouraged our students to reach for the stars, quite literally in this case. Our science program—" Dr. Martinez politely but firmly interrupted. "This invitation is based solely on Morgan's individual work and innovative thinking. Our interest is in her specific approach to a challenge we're actively working to solve." She turned back to Morgan, whose mind was still processing the invitation. "You don't need to decide immediately about the internship. The conference presentation would be fully funded by NASA, including travel expenses for you and a parent or guardian. We can provide all the details by email tomorrow." Morgan found her voice at last. "Thank you, Dr. Martinez. I would be honored to present at the conference." As the NASA team prepared to leave, Dr. Martinez handed Morgan her business card. "Email me directly if you have any questions, and keep developing these ideas. The kind of practical innovation you've demonstrated is exactly what we need for sustainable habitation, whether on Earth or beyond." The team made their way back to the waiting helicopter, with Morgan, Mrs. Gonzalez, Principal Richardson, and several still stunned faculty members accompanying them. As they reached the athletic field, Dr. Martinez embraced her mother once more, before turning to Morgan. "Don't let anyone convince you that practical solutions to real problems are somehow less valuable than complex technology for its own sake," she said, her voice pitched to reach only Morgan's ears. "Some of our most important innovations at NASA came from people who understood resource constraints firsthand and found elegant ways to work within them." With a final handshake, the NASA team boarded their helicopter. As the rotors spun up to speed, Morgan stood watching, still barely able to comprehend the dramatic reversal of her fortunes in just 24 hours. Principal Richardson wasted no time in positioning herself beside Morgan as the helicopter lifted off. "Miss Chambers, we should discuss how to prepare you for this NASA presentation. Westridge Academy will, of course, want to support you fully in representing our institution." Before Morgan could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message from her father. "Just got off work. How did the NASA visit go?" Morgan smiled, typing quickly. "They're real, Dad, and they want me to present at Johnson Space Center next month. I'll explain everything when you get here." As the helicopter disappeared into the distance, Morgan felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Blake Harrison standing behind her, his usual confidence notably diminished. "That was impressive," he said awkwardly. "I didn't realize your project had practical applications for NASA." Morgan considered several possible responses before simply saying, "There's more than one kind of innovation, Blake. Sometimes the most valuable solutions aren't the most complex or expensive ones." As students and faculty began dispersing, Mrs. Gonzalez approached with a gentle smile. "I hope you don't mind that I shared your project with Elena. She's always had an eye for overlooked brilliance." Morgan shook her head. "I can't thank you enough, Mrs. Gonzalez. Not just for connecting me with your daughter, but for being the only person who really saw the value in my work yesterday." "I recognize something in you that reminded me of Elena when she was your age," the librarian replied. She too was often underestimated because she approached problems differently than her teachers expected. As Morgan began carefully packing up her prototype, Dr. Kensington approached, his demeanor markedly different from the previous day. "Ms. Chambers," he began, clearing his throat uncomfortably, "I may have been hasty in my assessment of your project yesterday. The practical applications weren't immediately apparent to me, but clearly NASA sees potential that I overlooked." Morgan met his gaze steadily. "My design was never about impressing judges, Dr. Kensington. It was about solving a real problem that affects my family and countless others. The techniques might seem simple, but they work. That's what matters in the real world." Dr. Kensington blinked, momentarily taken aback by her measured response. "Yes, well, Westridge Academy will certainly support your NASA presentation. Perhaps we could schedule some preparatory sessions to refine your delivery." "Thank you for the offer," Morgan replied politely, "but I think I'll prepare in my own way. After all, NASA seems interested in my approach as it is." As Dr. Kensington walked away, Morgan continued gathering her materials, her mind already racing with ideas for improvements to her system and questions for the NASA team. Through the science lab windows, she could see her father's pickup truck pulling into the school's circular driveway. The contrast between the battered farm vehicle and the surrounding luxury cars no longer bothered her as it once had. Morgan realized that for the first time since receiving her scholarship to Westridge, she felt neither intimidated by her wealthy classmates nor defensive about her background. The validation from NASA professionals hadn't just acknowledged her scientific work. It had affirmed the value of her entire perspective, shaped by farm life and practical problem-solving. As she carried her prototype toward the exit, Morgan passed a small group of younger students who had witnessed the entire NASA visit. One girl, perhaps a freshman, stepped forward hesitantly. "That was amazing," she said, her eyes wide with admiration. "I'm from a small farm in Crawford County. I never thought people like us could do things that would interest NASA." Morgan smiled, recognizing in the younger girl's expression the same self-doubt she had struggled with for years. "Don't let anyone tell you where innovation can or can't and come from," she said. "Some of the best ideas grow from the most unexpected places, like small farms in Crawford County." The girl's face brightened, and Morgan continued toward the exit, knowing that whatever happened next, the NASA conference, the potential internship, her remaining time at Westridge, something fundamental had shifted. Not just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. Outside, her father leaned against his truck, questions written all over his. Morgan stepped into her father's embrace. Emotions she'd been controlling all afternoon, finally bubbling to the surface. James Chambers held his daughter tight, sensing the magnitude of what had just happened. "They were actually from NASA, Dad," she whispered against his shoulder. "Real NASA engineers. They want me to present at Johnson Space Center next month." James pulled back to look at his daughter's face, his weathered hands gently holding her shoulders. "I knew your project was special, but NASA, that's something else entirely." The pride in his eyes made Morgan's throat tighten. For years, she'd watched her parents sacrifice to give her educational opportunities they never had. Now, finally, she felt she might be able to make those sacrifices worth it. "Let's get your project loaded up," he said, helping her carefully place the prototype in the truck bed. "Your mother's not going to believe this." As they secured the last components, Morgan noticed Principal Richardson approaching with determined strides, followed closely by Dr. Kensington. The administrator's expression was a practiced blend of pride and authority that Morgan had come to recognize as her public relations face. "Mr. Chambers," Principal Richardson extended her hand with a warm smile. "I'm Evelyn Richardson, Morgan's principal. I wanted to personally congratulate you on your daughter's achievement. Westridge Academy is extremely proud." James wiped his hand on his jeans before shaking hers, his expression guarded but polite. "Thank you. Morgan's always had a good head on her shoulders." "Indeed," Principal Richardson continued smoothly, "we've always recognized Morgan's unique perspective as an asset to our student body. Diversity of thought is something we value highly at Westridge." Morgan barely contained a snort at this revisionist history. Just yesterday, her unique perspective had been dismissed as irrelevant folk wisdom. "Dr. Kensington and I were hoping to discuss how Westridge can support Morgan's NASA presentation," Principal Richardson continued. "We'd like to arrange media coverage, of course. It's not every day one of our students receives such recognition." James Chambers looked from the principal to his daughter, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't fully understand. "What kind of support did you have in mind?" Dr. Kensington stepped forward. "Presentation coaching, professional grade visual, materials, perhaps some additional technical input to refine her research methodology." He smiled at Morgan in what he clearly thought was an encouraging manner. "We want to ensure she represents Westridge at the highest level possible." Morgan met her father's eyes, a silent communication passing between them. James nodded slightly, understanding her unspoken message. "That's generous," Morgan said carefully, "but I think I'll prepare my presentation independently. NASA seems interested in my approach as it is, not a polished version created to represent Westridge Academy." Principal Richardson's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Morgan, dear, NASA operates at the highest levels of scientific discourse. Professional support would only enhance your natural abilities." "With all due respect, Principal Richardson," Morgan replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I designed and built this system myself when no one at Westridge showed any interest. I'll present it myself too, in my own words." "Doctor," Kensington cleared his throat uncomfortably, "perhaps we've gotten off on the wrong foot. What happened at the science fair was unfortunate, a misunderstanding of the project's significance." Morgan looked directly at the science teacher. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Dr. Kensington. You understood exactly what my project was. You just didn't think it was valuable until NASA said it was." A profound silence followed her words. Principal Richardson appeared momentarily speechless, unused to being challenged by students. James Chambers' eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the closest he ever came to outright smiling in tense situations. "Well," Principal Richardson finally said, her administrator's composure quickly reasserting itself, "perhaps we can discuss this further after you've had time to process today's excitement. I'll have my assistant reach out to schedule a meeting next week." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked back toward the school building, Dr. Kensington following. In her wake, after casting one last conflicted glance at Morgan. Once they were out of earshot, James turned to his daughter with raised eyebrows. "Sounds like there's more to this story than you mentioned on the phone." Morgan sighed, sliding into the passenger seat of the truck. "I'll explain everything. On the way home, it's been quite a 24 hours. During the 20-mile drive back to Sweetwater Farm, Morgan recounted the previous day's science fair in detail. Dr. Kensington's dismissive comments, the smirks from classmates, and Mrs. Gonzalez's unexpected support. With each revelation, her father's expression darkened, though he kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I'm sorry you had to face that kind of judgment," he said finally, as they turned onto the gravel road leading to their farm. "Your mother, and I wondered if sending you to Westridge might expose you to people who look down on farming families, but we thought the educational opportunities would outweigh that risk." "Most of the time, I just ignore it," Morgan admitted. "But yesterday was different. It wasn't just me they were dismissing. It was everything we do, our knowledge, our way of solving problems." James nodded slowly. "And now they want to claim credit for your success." "Exactly," Morgan said, relieved that her father understood. "They've ignored or belittled my ideas until the moment someone important recognized their value. Now suddenly they want to support me, which really means control how I present myself so it reflects well on them." Her father pulled the truck to a stop in front of their white farmhouse, its paint slightly faded but meticulously maintained. "You know what this reminds me of?" he said, turning to face his daughter. "Remember that broken combine harvester 3 summers back? Every mechanic in the county said it couldn't be fixed without replacing parts we couldn't afford." Morgan nodded, remembering the sweltering July days when that mechanical failure had threatened their entire wheat harvest. "But your grandfather insisted there was another way," James continued. "Everyone thought the old man had lost his mind when he started tinkering with that makeshift solution, until it worked." He squeezed Morgan's shoulder gently. "People who've never had to solve problems with limited resources don't understand the kind of innovation that necessity creates. They think advanced technology and expensive equipment are the only paths to progress, but some of the most elegant solutions come from people who have to work within constraints." "That's almost exactly what Dr. Martinez said," Morgan replied, smiling at the connection. "Smart woman," James nodded approvingly. "Now come on, your mother's probably wearing a path in the kitchen floor waiting to hear what happened." Sarah Chambers was indeed waiting anxiously, rushing onto the porch as soon as she heard the truck approaching. Her face, lined from years of worry and weather, but still beautiful in Morgan's eyes, broke into a wide smile when she saw her daughter's expression. "It's true," she asked breathlessly. "NASA really came." Morgan nodded, allowing herself to be pulled into another tight embrace before the 3 of them moved inside. Over Sarah's special occasion, pot roast, clearly prepared. In anticipation of either celebration or consolation, Morgan recounted the day's events again. Her mother alternated between tears of pride and indignation at how Morgan had been treated at the science fair. "I knew that project was special from the moment you started designing it," Sarah said, serving apple pie for dessert. "The way you combined your grandfather's techniques with modern materials. That's the kind of thinking we need more of, not less." Dr. Martinez said they're interested in my approach for space habitats and disaster relief programs, Morgan explained, still somewhat dazed by this development. Apparently, efficient water collection systems that don't require much power or complex technology have applications I never even considered. When's this conference they invited you to? James asked, helping himself to another slice of pie. Next month, April 15th or 17th. Dr. Martinez said NASA would cover all expenses for me and one of you to accompany me. Her parents exchanged a look that Morgan recognized immediately, the silent calculation of what they could afford, what sacrifices might be necessary. Dad, they're paying for everything, she emphasized. Flights, hotel, everything. Even. So, Sarah said thoughtfully, one of us would need to take time off work. James, could Miller cover the East Fields if you're gone those days? I'd make it work, he said firmly. This is too important to miss. After dinner, while her parents washed dishes, Morgan retreated to her bedroom. Unlike the fashionable rooms of her Westridge classmates, her space was functional and modest. The walls were painted a simple blue, decorated with scientific diagrams, agricultural innovation articles, and a few ribbons from county fair competitions. Her desk was a hand-me-down from her grandfather, solid oak that had survived decades of use. She sat down at her computer, not the latest model, but perfectly adequate for research and schoolwork, and found an email from Dr. Martinez, already waiting in her inbox. The NASA engineer had sent detailed information about a conference, including an outline of what Morgan's presentation might cover and suggestions for adapting her prototype for demonstration purposes. The email concluded with a personal note. Morgan, I want to reiterate how impressed my team and I were with your innovative approach. In our work at NASA, we often find that the most elegant solutions emerge from individuals who understand resource constraints firsthand. Your ability to create an effective system using accessible materials demonstrates exactly the kind of problem-solving we value. Don't let anyone diminish the significance of what you've created. Sometimes the scientific establishment is too quick to dismiss approaches that originate outside traditional academic pathways. Some of NASA's most important innovations came from people who thought differently about established problems. I look forward to introducing you to our sustainability research team next month. In the meantime, keep thinking, keep creating, and keep trusting your unique perspective. Best regards, Dr. Elena Martinez. Morgan read the email twice, her chest tight with emotion. All her life she'd navigated between two worlds, the practical, hands-on knowledge of farm life and the theoretical, academic approach of school. She'd often felt she didn't fully belong in either realm, too scholarly for some farming families, too practical for Westridge's academic elite. For the first time, someone had recognized the value in bridging those worlds, in combining theoretical knowledge with practical wisdom. Not just recognized it, but celebrated it as precisely the perspective needed to solve complex problems. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Her mother entered, carrying a small wrapped package. "Your father and I were saving this for your birthday next month," Sarah said, sitting on the edge of Morgan's bed. "But it seems more appropriate now." Morgan unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "It was your grandfather's idea, actually," Sarah explained. "He started keeping detailed notes on his innovations when he was about your age. Said writing things down forced him to clarify his thinking." Morgan ran her fingers over the smooth leather. "Thank you. It's perfect." "He would have been so proud of you today, Morgan," Sarah said softly. "Not just because NASA recognized your work, but because you stood your ground when people tried to dismiss it." Morgan nodded, fighting back unexpected tears. Her grandfather had passed away 3 years earlier, but his influence remained profound. He had been the one to first show her how dew formed differently on various surfaces, how water moved through soil, how plants adapted to drought conditions, practical knowledge accumulated through decades of careful observation. "I miss him," she said simply. "I know, sweetheart," Sarah squeezed her hand, "but he's still here in the way you think, the way you solve problems. I saw him in your eyes today when you told us about explaining your project to those NASA engineers." After her mother left, Morgan opened the journal to its first blank page. She hesitated only a moment before beginning to write, recording not just the day's events but her thoughts on how to improve her water harvesting system. Dr. Martinez's email had sparked new ideas about how her design might be adapted for different environments. As her pencil moved across the page, Morgan felt a clarity and purpose she had rarely experienced before. This journal would not just document her ideas, but serve as a bridge between the practical wisdom she'd inherited and the scientific knowledge. She was acquiring proof that innovation could flourish in the space between these worlds. The next morning, Morgan awoke to the sound of rain against her window. Gentle spring showers that would help prepare the fields for planting. Normally, she would have slept in on a Saturday, but today she was too energized by the possibilities unfolding before her. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find her father already at the kitchen table, reviewing weather forecasts and planting schedules. "Morning, kiddo," he greeted her, looking up from his paperwork. "Sleep well?" "Not really," she admitted, with a smile. "Too many ideas bouncing around." James nodded understandingly. "Inspiration works that way sometimes. Your grandfather used to say good ideas were like skittish animals. You had to approach them carefully or they'd run off." Morgan poured herself coffee, a habit her mother disapproved of but her father permitted, and sat across from him. "Dad, I've been thinking about the water harvester. What if we installed a larger version here on the farm? The prototype collects enough for a small garden plot, but with some scaling adjustments, we might be able to supplement irrigation for the north field." James considered this, tapping his pen thoughtfully against the table. "That's the driest section of our land. Even a modest water supplement during drought periods could make a significant difference." "Exactly," Morgan said, enthusiasm building. "And if we positioned multiple collection units along the northern perimeter, we could create a distributed system that would be more resilient than a centralized one." As they discussed the practical considerations, materials, placement, maintenance, Morgan's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She checked the screen, surprised to see Blake Harrison's name. After a moment's hesitation, she answered. "Hello? Morgan?" As her Blake's voice sounded uncharacteristically tentative. I hope it's not too early to call." "I've been up for hours," she replied neutrally, aware of her father watching with curiosity. "What can I do for you, Blake?" "Look, I wanted to apologize for how I acted at the science fair, and before that really." He paused awkwardly. "What I said about your project, the scarecrow comment and everything, it was stupid and mean." Morgan hadn't expected this. In 3 years at Westridge, she'd never heard Blake Harrison apologize to anyone. Seeing those NASA people take your work seriously made me realize I don't actually know as much as I think I do, he continued, when she didn't immediately respond. "My quantum computing project? My dad's company basically designed it. I just presented it." Morgan raised her eyebrows, though Blake couldn't see her reaction. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," he hesitated, "because I've been thinking about what you said, about different kinds of innovation, and I wondered if you'd let me see how your water harvester works. Like, actually works, not just the science fair presentation." James raised a questioning eyebrow at Morgan, who shrugged slightly, equally confused by this turn of events. "Why the sudden interest?" she asked directly. "Honestly, after you left yesterday, my dad called. Apparently, Dr. Martinez is kind of a big deal in sustainable technology circles, and he knows her from some conference. When he heard NASA came to see a Westridge student's project, he was all excited, thinking it was mine. Blake's voice grew, quieter, having to tell him it was actually the project I'd been mocking. That was pretty humiliating. Despite herself, Morgan felt a twinge of sympathy. She knew something about parental expectations, though hers took a very different form than Blake's. If you're serious about wanting to understand how it works, you can come see it, she decided. But this isn't a tourist visit to laugh at the quaint farm. This is about the science. That's fair, Blake agreed quickly. And could I bring Cameron? He's actually interested in environmental engineering, though he doesn't talk about it much at school. Morgan remembered Cameron Chen. Quiet, always in Blake's shadow, but one of the few wealthy students who had never participated in mocking her. Fine, she agreed. But you'll have to come here. The system needs to be installed to demonstrate properly. After arranging for Blake and Cameron to visit the following afternoon and ending the call, Morgan looked up to find her father regarding her with an expression mixing pride and concern. That's quite a turnaround from the boy who was making scarecrow jokes yesterday, he observed. Morgan shrugged. We'll see if he actually shows up, or if this is just temporary guilt. Either way, James said, you've handled this whole situation with more grace than most adults would manage. Standing your ground without becoming bitter, that's a rare quality, Morgan. His words warmed her more than she wanted to admit. For all the excitement of NASA's interest, her parents' pride remained the approval that mattered most. The rest of the day passed in a productive blur. Morgan worked with her father to identify optimal locations for scaled-up water harvesters, taking soil samples and measuring sun exposure at different points throughout the day. Sarah, caught up in the excitement, brought lunch out to the fields and stayed to help with measurements, her nursing training making her particularly valuable for precise record-keeping. By evening, they had developed a preliminary plan for 5 collection stations that could potentially harvest enough water to reduce their irrigation needs by 15–20% during dry periods, a significant saving for a farm operating on tight margins. As they returned to the house for dinner, Morgan received another unexpected call, this time from Mrs. Gonzalez. Morgan, dear, I wanted to check how you're doing after all the excitement yesterday, the librarian said warmly. Still processing everything, Morgan admitted, but excited. I've been working on plans to scale up the system for our farm. That's wonderful, Mrs. Gonzalez replied. Elena called me this morning. She's already shared your design with colleagues. In NASA's Earth Applications Division, they work on adapting space technologies for developing regions facing resource challenges. Morgan sat down on the porch steps, taken aback by this information. I didn't realize my project would interest people outside the space habitat team. That's the beauty of elegant solutions, dear. They often have applications beyond their original purpose. Mrs. Gonzalez's voice took on a more serious tone. I also called because Principal Richardson has scheduled an all-staff meeting for Monday morning. The agenda mentions Westridge representation at NASA conference as the main topic. Morgan sighed. They're still trying to figure out how to take credit, aren't they? I believe so, Mrs. Gonzalez confirmed. I thought you should be prepared. The school newsletter draft already describes your project as developed through Westridge Academy's innovative science program with mentorship from our distinguished faculty. That's not even remotely true, Morgan said, frustration evident in her voice. I know, dear, and Elena knows it too. The librarian's tone turned mischievous, which is why she's arranged for the NASA press release to specifically mention that your project was independently developed with special recognition of your application of traditional farming knowledge to modern sustainability challenges. For the first time in the conversation, Morgan laughed. Dr. Kensington isn't going to like that very much. No, Mrs. Gonzalez agreed cheerfully. "He isn't, but perhaps it will serve as a valuable lesson in recognizing innovation wherever it appears, not just in expected packages." After thanking Mrs. Gonzalez for the warning and ending the call, Morgan rejoined her parents in the kitchen. As they prepared dinner together, a family tradition whenever farm work allowed, she shared what the librarian had told her. "Sounds like Monday morning will be interesting," Sarah commented, dicing onions with the precision of someone who had prepared countless meals for hungry farmhands. "I'm not looking forward to it," Morgan admitted, setting the table. "I hate confrontation." James looked up from the soup he was stirring. "Standing up for the truth isn't the same as seeking confrontation, Morgan. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do is refuse to let others rewrite your story." Morgan considered this as she arranged water glasses on the table. Her father rarely offered direct advice, preferring to let her find her own way. When he did speak up, his words usually carried extra weight. "I'm not sure how to handle it without coming across as ungrateful," she confessed. "Westridge did give me educational opportunities I wouldn't have had otherwise. Being grateful for opportunities doesn't mean letting people misrepresent your achievements," Sarah pointed out. "You can acknowledge what the school provided while still being honest about developing your project independently." As they sat down to dinner, the conversation shifted to preparations for Blake and Cameron's visit the next day. Despite her lingering skepticism about Blake's sincerity, Morgan found herself looking forward to demonstrating her system to someone who might now actually appreciate the science behind it. That night, she spent several hours updating her project documentation and preparing simplified explanations of the key principles. If Blake and Cameron were genuinely interested, she wanted to be ready to answer their questions properly. If this was just an elaborate form of mockery, well, she would face that with the same dignity she'd maintained throughout. Sunday dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for demonstrating an outdoor water collection system. Morgan rose early to check that her prototype was functioning optimally, making minor adjustments to the collection surfaces to maximize the morning dew capture. By the time Blake's silver Tesla pulled up the dirt driveway, kicking up dust that seemed somehow symbolic against the vehicle's pristine finish, Morgan had prepared a comprehensive demonstration and explanation of her system. James had made himself scarce, sensing that at her locker, Morgan found Blake and Cameron waiting as promised. "Staff meeting just ended," Blake reported. "Principal Richardson's coming out of the admin wing, looking like someone stole her thunder." "Dr. Kensington was right behind her," Cameron added. "He didn't look happy either." Morgan took a deep breath, steadying herself. "What are they planning?" "According to my sources, the NASA press release landed in Richardson's inbox this morning," Blake explained. "It specifically mentions that your project was independently developed, drawing on intergenerational agricultural knowledge, without institutional support. Not exactly the narrative they were hoping to promote." Morgan couldn't help but smile at Dr. Martinez's precision. The engineer had found the perfect language to acknowledge her work's origins without directly criticizing. "Westridge, there's a special assembly called for this afternoon," Cameron continued. "Rumor is Richardson wants to frame this as a Westridge success story before the local media picks it up." "She can try," Blake said with unexpected loyalty, "but we've got your back. Half the student body saw Kensington dismiss your project before NASA arrived." The morning passed in a blur of classes and whispered conversations. Morgan found herself simultaneously the center of attention and strangely isolated, as though she occupied a space between her old invisibility and her new notoriety. Teachers who had barely acknowledged her before now called on her frequently, sometimes with genuine interest, others with a transparent attempt to associate themselves with her sudden recognition. By lunchtime, the special assembly had been officially announced. Attendance mandatory for all students and faculty at 2 p.m. Morgan sat with Blake and Cameron in the cafeteria, an arrangement that raised eyebrows throughout the room. The school's social hierarchy had always been rigid, with farm scholarship students and technology heirs occupying opposite ends of the spectrum. "You know what's really bothering Richardson and Kensington?" Cameron said quietly as they ate. "It's not just that NASA recognized your project after they dismissed it. It's that your success challenges their entire worldview about what constitutes valuable knowledge." Blake nodded in agreement. The school prides itself on preparing students for elite universities and prestigious careers. But your project suggests that some of the most innovative solutions might come from perspectives they've systematically undervalued. "I never thought of it that way," Morgan admitted. "I was just trying to solve a problem that affects my family and others, like us." "That's exactly the point," Cameron insisted. "You were addressing a real need, rather than creating something to impress college admissions officers." NASA recognized that authenticity. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sophia Chen, student body president and one of Westridge's most accomplished seniors. Unlike most of the school's elite students, Sophia had always been cordial to Morgan, though they had never been friends. "Morgan, do you have a minute?" Sophia asked, her expression uncharacteristically hesitant. Morgan nodded, curious about what the student leader might want. "I just came from a meeting with Principal Richardson," Sophia explained, taking a seat. "She's asked me to introduce you at today's assembly and present this on behalf of the student council." She pulled out a certificate embossed with the Westridge crest. "It's a special recognition for scientific achievement." Morgan examined the certificate with mixed emotions. The gesture seemed both generous and calculated, a way for the school to position itself as having supported her all along. "They're planning to have Dr. Kensington speak about how Westridge's science program nurtures unconventional thinking," Sophia continued, her tone making clear her discomfort with the situation. "Richardson wants photographs of you accepting the certificate with Kensington for the school newsletter and website." Blake made a disgusted noise. "Unbelievable. They're trying to rewrite history before it's even published." Sophia looked uncomfortable but determined. "That's why I wanted to talk to you first, Morgan. As student body president, I'm supposed to present this as though it comes from all of us. But I was at the science fair. I saw how they treated your project." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I believe in giving credit where it's due, both positive and negative. If you don't want me to do this, I'll tell Richardson I can't participate." Morgan was touched by Sophia's integrity. The student president had a perfect academic record and admission offers from multiple Ivy League universities. Standing against the administration could jeopardize recommendations and relationships she had spent years cultivating. "I appreciate that, Sophia," Morgan said sincerely. "But don't put yourself in that position. I can handle this." "What are you going to do?" Cameron asked after Sophia left. Morgan considered the question carefully. Her instinct was to refuse participation in what felt like a dishonest narrative, but she also recognized the complexity of the situation. Westridge had provided her educational opportunities, even if they hadn't supported her project specifically. "I'm going to tell the truth," she decided finally. "Not to embarrass anyone, but not to enable misrepresentation either." The assembly hall was packed when Morgan arrived with Blake and Cameron. Principal Richardson stood near the stage, in animated conversation with Dr. Kensington and several board members who had apparently been invited for the occasion. Local media representatives positioned cameras at the back of the room. The NASA visit had attracted attention beyond the school community. Morgan slipped into a seat in the middle rows, trying to remain inconspicuous for as long as possible. Her stomach tightened with anxiety, but she reminded herself of her father's words. The work speaks for itself. At precisely 2:00 p.m., Principal Richardson ascended the stage, tapping the microphone to bring the room to attention. Her tailored suit and confident posture projected the polished authority for which she was known. "Good afternoon, Westridge Academy," she began, her practiced smile encompassing the entire room. "Today, we gather to celebrate an extraordinary achievement by one of our own students, an achievement that exemplifies the innovative spirit we strive to foster here at Westridge." Morgan watched as Richardson launched into an elaborate description of the school's commitment to nurturing diverse approaches to scientific inquiry and encouraging students to think beyond conventional boundaries. The irony was almost painful, given the reality of the science fair just days earlier. "As many of you know, Westridge received a special visit from NASA engineers last Friday," Richardson continued. "They came specifically to review a project developed by junior Morgan Chambers, who will soon present her research at Johnson Space Center." She gestured toward Dr. Kensington, who joined her on stage. "Under the guidance of our distinguished science department head, Morgan developed an atmospheric water harvesting system with applications for sustainable agriculture and, as NASA recognized, potential space habitation technologies." Morgan felt her face flush with indignation at this blatant misrepresentation. Dr. Kensington hadn't guided her work. He had dismissed it entirely until NASA's interest made it valuable by association. "I would now like to invite our student, Body President Sophia Chen, to make a special presentation," Richardson announced. Sophia approached the podium with visible reluctance. Her usually confident demeanor seemed subdued as she adjusted the microphone. "As student body president, I've been asked to present a special recognition certificate to Morgan Chambers," she began, her voice steady despite her evident discomfort. "But before I do, I want to acknowledge something important." The slight pause that followed seemed to stretch indefinitely. Principal Richardson shifted uneasily, while Dr. Kensington's expression darkened with apprehension. "Many of us were present at the science fair last Thursday," Sophia continued. "We saw Morgan present her project and heard the feedback she received. While Westridge Academy provided the venue for that presentation, it would not be accurate to suggest that Morgan's innovative water harvesting system was developed with institutional support or faculty guidance." A collective intake of breath swept through the audience. Principal Richardson stepped forward as if to interrupt, but Sophia pressed on with quiet determination. "As students of this institution, we are taught that intellectual integrity is paramount, that truth matters in science and in life." She turned to look directly at Morgan. Morgan developed her project independently, drawing on her family's agricultural knowledge and her own research. NASA recognized the value in her approach precisely because it came from outside traditional academic pathways. The silence that followed was profound. Principal Richardson seemed momentarily frozen, caught between maintaining appearances and addressing this unexpected deviation from her script. Dr. Kensington recovered first, stepping to the microphone with a tight smile. "Thank you, Sophia, for that." And context. It's true that Morgan took significant initiative in her project. That's exactly the kind of self-directed learning we encourage at Westridge. His attempt to recover the narrative fell flat against Sophia's simple honesty. The student, audience always quick to recognize authenticity, responded with scattered applause for their president's courage. "We would now like to invite Morgan to accept this recognition and share a few words about her upcoming NASA presentation," Dr. Kensington continued, gesturing toward where Morgan sat. All eyes turned in her direction. Morgan stood slowly, gathering her thoughts as she walked toward the stage. This was not a moment for anger or accusation, but for the same quiet dignity with which she had faced Dr. Martinez's questions. As she reached the podium, she accepted the certificate with a polite nod to Sophia, but did not immediately speak. Instead, she took a moment to survey the assembled students, teachers, board members, and media representatives. The silence extended, until it became almost uncomfortable, a technique her grandfather had taught her for ensuring people's full attention. "Thank you for this recognition," she finally began, her voice clear despite her racing heart. "The past few days have been quite a journey, from having my project dismissed at our science fair to receiving an invitation to present at NASA's Sustainable Systems Conference." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I want to be clear about something important. My atmospheric water harvesting system was not developed as part of Westridge's science curriculum or under faculty guidance. It was created at my family's farm, built with materials available to small-scale farmers and designed to address a real need in agricultural communities facing water insecurity." Principal Richardson's expression tightened, but Morgan continued, with respectful confidence, "That doesn't diminish the value of the education I've received at Westridge. The theoretical knowledge I've gained here complemented the practical wisdom passed down through generations of farming in my family. The project represents a bridge between these different but equally valuable types of knowledge." She looked directly at Dr. Kensington now. "When NASA engineers expressed interest in my design, they specifically valued its origins outside traditional research pathways. Dr. Martinez emphasized that some of their most important innovations come from individuals who understand resource constraints firsthand and find creative solutions within those limitations." Morgan turned back to address the entire assembly. "There's an important lesson here for all of us. Innovation doesn't just happen in expensive laboratories or prestigious institutions. It often emerges from the margins, from people solving real problems with limited resources, drawing on knowledge that may not be recognized in academic settings." The room had grown completely still, students and faculty alike captivated by her unexpected eloquence and authenticity. "I'm grateful for the educational opportunities Westridge has provided me," Morgan continued, her tone softening. "And I'm equally grateful for the practical wisdom my family and farming community have shared. Neither knowledge system alone would have produced this innovation. It required both." She carefully set the certificate on the podium. "I appreciate this recognition, but I cannot accept it under false pretenses. If Westridge wants to celebrate this achievement, let's do so honestly, acknowledging both the value of academic knowledge and the limitations of institutional perspectives." For several seconds, no one moved or spoke. Then, from the back of the room, someone began to applaud. Others joined in quickly, the sound building until most of the student body was on their feet. Even some faculty members joined the standing ovation, recognizing the courage and integrity Morgan had demonstrated. Principal Richardson stepped forward with the practiced recovery of an experienced administrator. "Thank you, Morgan, for that candid perspective. We at Westridge believe in encouraging students to express their views, even when challenging conventional wisdom." Her attempt to reclaim control of the narrative barely registered against the authentic connection Morgan had established with her peers. As Morgan returned to her seat, students reached out to shake her hand or offer words of support. The distinction between scholarship student and full tuition peer seemed momentarily erased by shared appreciation for her courage. The assembly concluded with Principal Richardson making brief announcements about NASA's upcoming visit for Morgan's presentation preparation, carefully framing it as an opportunity for the entire student body to engage with space science. But the controlled narrative she had planned lay in tatters, replaced by something more authentic and ultimately more powerful. As students filed out of the assembly hall, Morgan found herself surrounded by classmates she had barely spoken with during her 3 years at Westridge. Many expressed admiration for her project now that they understood its real-world applications. Others quietly thanked her for standing up to what one senior called the Westridge revisionist history machine. Blake and Cameron waited at the exit, Blake's expression unusually serious. "That was impressive," he said simply. "Standing your ground without burning bridges, not easy to do. Especially when the bridges are to institutions with a lot more power than you have," Cameron added. "You threaded that needle perfectly." Morgan smiled, feeling a curious mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. "I just told the truth. Not to hurt anyone, but because accuracy matters, in science and in life." As they walked toward their lockers, Sophia caught up with them. "Morgan, that was exactly right. Thank you for handling it so gracefully. I was worried it would turn into a confrontation, but you elevated the entire conversation." "We both did," Morgan replied, genuinely appreciative of the student president's initial honesty. "You took a risk too, going off script like that." Sophia shrugged. "Not nearly as much risk as developing an innovative water harvesting system without institutional support." She grinned suddenly. "Besides, I already got into Stanford. What's Richardson going to do? Unadmit me?" As they parted ways, Morgan checked her phone to find several messages waiting. One was from her mother, responding to the text update Morgan had sent during lunch. "Stand tall and speak truth. We're proud of you no matter what." Another was from Dr. Martinez. "NASA press team monitoring Westridge situation. Your integrity in this matter reflects exactly the values we seek in potential team members. Looking forward to conference preparations next week." The third was most surprising. A message from Mr. Harrison, Blake's father. Blake shared, "Video of your assembly speech. Intellectual honesty combined with diplomatic skill is rare, especially in someone your age. My offer to discuss your technology remains open, with added interest in your perspective on sustainable innovation." Impressive. Work on multiple fronts. As Morgan walked to her last class of the day, she reflected on how dramatically her world had changed in just 4 days. What began as humiliation at the science fair had transformed into not just validation of her technical innovation, but recognition of the unique perspective she brought to problem-solving. More importantly, she had discovered a strength within herself that no external validation could provide, the courage to stand in her truth without seeking to diminish others. That balance of confidence and compassion, she realized, was perhaps her grandfather's most important legacy. The afternoon sun broke through lingering clouds as Morgan crossed the campus courtyard, casting everything in a warm, clarifying light. In that moment, she understood something fundamental about innovation and integrity. Both required the courage to see things as they truly are, not as convention dictates they should be. With that awareness came a profound sense of purpose that transcended NASA recognition or school politics. Morgan had found her voice, a voice that could bridge worlds and perspectives, translating between different forms of knowledge without privileging either. That translation, she now understood, might be her most valuable contribution of all. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of another school day, Morgan gathered her belongings with a new sense of confidence. The path ahead, NASA presentation, potential internship, senior year and beyond, stretched before her with both challenges and opportunities. But whatever came next, she would face it with the same grounded authenticity that had carried her through today's confrontation. Outside the main entrance, she spotted her father's pickup truck waiting in the line of luxury vehicles. Unlike previous days, when she had felt a flash of embarrassment at the contrast, Morgan walked toward it with pride. That truck, with its mud-spattered wheels and weathered paint, represented the practical wisdom and honest labor that had informed her innovation. values no prestigious institution could provide. James Chambers smiled as his daughter approached, intuitively reading her expression. "Good day," he asked simply. Morgan nodded, feeling a deep contentment that transcended the day's drama. "I told the truth," she replied, "and it turned out that was exactly what needed to be said." Her father's approving nod contained all the validation she needed. As they pulled away from Westridge Academy, Morgan looked back at the imposing buildings with new perspective. She had entered those halls 3 years ago, believing she needed to become more like her wealthy, polished classmates to succeed. Now, she understood that her greatest contribution would come not from conforming to their world, but from bridging it with her own. The weeks that followed brought a whirlwind of activity as Morgan prepared for her NASA presentation. Dr. Martinez arranged for a team of engineers to visit Sweetwater Farm, this time to work directly with Morgan on adapting her prototype for the conference demonstration. Unlike the Westridge science faculty, the NASA team approached Morgan as a colleague, valuing her practical knowledge and insights. "The beauty of your design is its adaptability," Dr. Wong explained as they modified the collection surfaces. With minimal adjustments, the same principles could work in disaster relief situations, developing regions without water infrastructure, or even early Mars habitation modules. Dr. Sharma, the environmental systems specialist, spent hours discussing with Morgan how traditional agricultural knowledge might inform other sustainability challenges. Indigenous and traditional wisdom often contains sophisticated understanding of natural systems, she observed. The problem is translation, making that knowledge accessible to technical disciplines without stripping it of context. Morgan found herself thriving in this collaborative environment where multiple forms of knowledge were valued and integrated. Each day brought new insights and possibilities as the NASA team helped refine her presentation for the upcoming conference. At Westridge, the aftermath of the assembly had created subtle but significant shifts. Principal Richardson maintained cordial relations with Morgan, but no longer attempted to claim institutional credit for her achievement. Dr. Kensington had become notably more attentive to projects from students with non-traditional backgrounds, particularly those addressing practical environmental challenges. More profound was the change in student dynamics. The rigid social hierarchy that had defined Morgan's Westridge experience began to dissolve as classmates sought her perspective on various projects and problems. Her approach to innovation, practical, resource-conscious, and oriented toward real needs, resonated with students increasingly concerned about environmental sustainability and social impact. Blake and Cameron had become regular visitors to Sweetwater Farm, often bringing other students interested in agricultural technology and sustainable systems. What began as curious field trips evolved into an informal working group focused on adapting Morgan's water harvesting principles to other applications. "This is the education I was actually looking for at Westridge," Cameron admitted one afternoon as they installed a modified harvester behind the barn. "Theory connected to practice, addressing real problems instead of abstract scenarios." 2 weeks before the NASA conference, Harrison Technologies formally proposed a partnership to develop scaled versions of Morgan's system for deployment in water-insecure regions. Following Dr. Martinez's advice, Morgan had established clear intellectual property protection while ensuring the core technology would remain accessible for humanitarian applications. "We want to honor both the innovation and its origins," Mr. Harrison explained during a meeting at the farm. "That means recognizing your contribution while respecting your intention to help farming communities like your own," Sidrunad said. The proposed agreement included funding for Morgan's college education at the engineering program of her choice, royalties from commercial applications, and a commitment to deploy subsidized systems in agricultural communities facing water scarcity. Most importantly, it acknowledged the value of the intergenerational farming knowledge that had informed the original design. As the conference date approached, Morgan received one final surprise, an invitation for her entire science class to attend her NASA presentation with transportation provided by Harrison Technologies and accommodations arranged by NASA's Educational Outreach Program. "We want students to see that innovation comes in many forms," Dr. Martinez explained when Morgan called to confirm the unusual arrangement. "Your journey from dismissed science fair project to NASA conference presentation is a powerful lesson in recognizing value beyond conventional parameters." The night before departing for Johnson Space Center, Morgan sat on the porch swing as evening settled over Sweetwater Farm. The first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the same stars that had guided farmers for millennia and now beckoned humanity's exploratory spirit. Her grandfather's journal rested in her lap, open to his handwritten observations about dew formation patterns that had inspired her water harvesting design. Beside it lay her conference presentation notes and NASA's preliminary proposals for adapting her system for space applications. Sarah Chambers stepped onto the porch, wrapping a light shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. She settled beside her daughter on the swing, following Morgan's gaze toward the stars. "Your grandfather would have loved seeing where his observations led," she said softly. "Not just the technology, but the bridges you've built between different worlds." Morgan nodded, feeling a deep connection to both the land beneath her feet and the infinite possibilities above. "I think that's what innovation really is," she reflected, "not just creating something new, but connecting knowledge that's been kept separate, finding the patterns that link seemingly different worlds." They rocked gently in comfortable silence for several minutes before Sarah spoke again. "Whatever happens at this conference, Morgan, remember that your greatest achievement isn't the water harvester itself. It's having the courage to stand in your truth while remaining open to other perspectives. That balance is rare and precious." As Morgan prepared for bed that night, she reflected on the extraordinary journey from humiliation to recognition, from invisibility to voice. The NASA invitation had been the catalyst, but the transformation ran deeper than external validation. She had discovered something essential about herself and about innovation itself, that the most powerful solutions often emerge at the intersection of different knowledge systems, in the dialogue between theory and practice, tradition and technology. Tomorrow, she would stand before NASA engineers and scientists, presenting her atmospheric water harvesting system with confidence in both its technical merit and its cultural origins. She would speak with the authority of someone who understood that true innovation transcends disciplinary boundaries and institutional hierarchies, someone who could translate between worlds that rarely communicate effectively. And in that translation, Morgan realized, lay a model for addressing not just water scarcity, but the complex, interconnected challenges facing humanity. The future would belong not to those who mastered a single discipline or perspective, but to those who could integrate diverse forms of knowledge with respect and creativity. As sleep claimed her, Morgan's final thoughts were not of NASA recognition or future opportunities, but of the simple satisfaction of useful work, of creating something that addressed real needs while honoring the wisdom of those who came before. In that purpose, she had found something beyond success or validation. She had found meaning. The morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for new beginnings. As Morgan loaded her presentation materials into her father's truck for the drive to the airport, she took one last look at Sweetwater Farm, the fields her family had tended for generations, the workshop where her prototype had first taken shape, the land that had taught her to observe and adapt. This place would always be part of her, informing her approach to engineering and innovation wherever her path might lead, not as a limitation to overcome, but as a foundation of practical wisdom upon which to build bridges between worlds that needed each other more than either might recognize. With that awareness came a quiet certainty that transcended the excitement of the NASA conference or the opportunities that might follow. Morgan had found her unique contribution, not just a water harvesting system, but a way of knowing and creating that honored multiple forms of knowledge while addressing real human needs. As the truck pulled away down the long driveway, Morgan wasn't leaving her roots behind. She was extending them outward, creating connections between worlds that had too long remained separate. In that integration lay the seeds of innovation that might truly deserve the name. Not merely new, but newly wise. The journey ahead would have its challenges and uncertainties, as all meaningful paths do. But Morgan Chambers would face them with the grounded confidence of someone who had discovered her authentic voice and purpose. A farmer's daughter whose greatest innovation was not a technology, but a perspective that could help bridge the divides that limit human progress. And in a world of increasing specialization and separation, such bridge builders are perhaps the most essential innovators of all. Johnson Space Center buzzed with activity as Morgan and her father stepped through. The main entrance, visitor badges prominently displayed. The massive facility sprawled across 2,600 acres, its buildings housing everything from astronaut training facilities to mission control centers and advanced research laboratories. Morgan had seen photos and videos, but nothing had prepared her for the scale and energy of the place, the tangible sense of human ingenuity pushing boundaries. "Chambers family!" Dr. Martinez called, striding across the gleaming lobby to greet them. Today, she wore a navy blue NASA flight jacket over professional attire, her badge identifying her as a senior researcher with security clearances Morgan could only guess at. "Welcome to JSC. How was your flight?" "Smooth sailing," James replied, shaking her hand. His casual work clothes had been replaced by his best suit, slightly dated, but meticulously pressed for the occasion. Despite his attempt at professional composure, Morgan could see the wonder in his eyes as he took in their surroundings. "We've got about an hour before the conference welcome session," Dr. Martinez explained as she led them through security checkpoints. "I thought you might appreciate a quick tour of some areas relevant to your presentation." What followed was a whirlwind introduction to NASA's sustainable habitation research, laboratories where scientists developed closed-loop life support systems, testing chambers for experimental water recycling technologies, and simulation, environments that mimicked the harsh conditions of lunar and Martian surfaces. "This is our water recovery testing lab," Dr. Martinez explained as they entered a large space filled with complex equipment and busy researchers. Every drop of water on the International Space Station is recycled, from humidity in the air to urine, creating a system that's about 93% efficient. But for long-duration missions or permanent habitats beyond Earth orbit, we need to push that efficiency even higher while reducing system complexity and energy requirements. She guided them to a testing station where a modified version of Morgan's water harvester had been constructed using aerospace-grade materials. "We've been experimenting with your design principles in simulated extraterrestrial environments. The passive condensation approach shows remarkable promise for supplementing primary water systems in habitats." Morgan examined the modified system with fascination. "You've changed the collection's surface pattern." "Good eye," Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly. "We adapted the pattern based on your grandfather's observations about optimal dew formation, but optimized for the different atmospheric composition and pressure gradients in our Mars habitat simulations." James watched his daughter engage with the NASA engineers, visibly proud as she asked insightful questions and offered suggestions based on her farm testing experience. What had begun as a simple irrigation solution for drought conditions had evolved into something with implications far beyond anything they had imagined. As they continued their tour, Dr. Martinez introduced them to researchers working on various aspects of sustainable habitation. Each scientist took time to explain how Morgan's approach to passive water collection had influenced their thinking or connected to their work. What's most valuable about your innovation isn't just the specific technology, explained Dr. Lakshmi Patel, a habitat systems integration specialist. It's the approach, using passive systems that work with natural, environmental processes rather than forcing outcomes through brute force engineering. That perspective is increasingly important as we design habitats with limited energy budgets and repair resources. Morgan absorbed each conversation with growing awareness of how her seemingly simple project connected to complex challenges. In space exploration, the technology mattered certainly, but even more valuable was the perspective she brought, the farmer's instinct for working within natural systems rather than against them. As they approached the conference center, where Morgan would give her presentation the following day, Dr. Martinez paused. "Before we join the welcome session, there's someone who wanted to meet you." She led them to a small meeting room where an older man in a wheelchair waited. Despite his age and the oxygen tube discreetly positioned behind his ear, he radiated an intense energy and focus. Morgan recognized him immediately from NASA documentary specials and textbook photographs. "Dr. Wilson," Dr. Martinez said with evident respect, "may I introduce Morgan Chambers and her father James." Dr. Robert Wilson had been one of NASA's pioneering engineers in life support systems design during the early space shuttle era. Now in his 80s, he remained an influential advisor on sustainable habitation technology. "So you're the young woman who's reminding NASA how to think differently," he said, his voice stronger than his frail appearance suggested. "I've been following your water harvester project with great interest." Morgan shook his offered hand, momentarily speechless at meeting such a legendary figure. "It's an honor, sir. Your work on regenerative environmental control systems has been foundational to everything in this field." Dr. Wilson's eyes twinkled, and yet after 50 years of increasingly complex engineering solutions, here comes a high school student with an elegantly simple design that makes us rethink our fundamental approaches. He gestured for them to sit. That's how progress really happens, not just through incremental improvements to existing systems, but through perspective shifts that reframe the problem entirely. For the next 20 minutes, Dr. Wilson engaged Morgan in a surprisingly detailed discussion of her design principles, occasionally nodding to James to acknowledge the agricultural wisdom that had informed the approach. Unlike some of the scientists they had met, who focused primarily on the technical specifications, Dr. Wilson seemed most interested in the thinking process behind the innovation. "You know," he said finally, "when I began my career, NASA regularly recruited people from farming backgrounds. They understood systems thinking in their bones, how water, soil, plants, and animals interconnect in ways that can't be reduced to simple linear processes. They recognized patterns that engineers with purely academic training often missed." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "Somewhere along the way, we began to privilege theoretical knowledge over practical wisdom, began to believe that only those with advanced degrees from prestigious institutions could contribute meaningfully to technological advancement." Morgan nodded, recognizing her own experience in his words. "That's exactly what happened at my school's science fair. My project was dismissed because it drew on farming knowledge rather than established scientific literature. And yet, here you are, Dr. Wilson smiled, preparing to present at NASA's Sustainable Systems Conference. There's a lesson in that, for all of us, in the scientific community. As they prepared to leave for the welcome session, Dr. Wilson offered Morgan one last piece of advice. Tomorrow, when you present your work, don't just explain the technology. Share the perspective that made it possible, the ability to see connections between different forms of knowledge. That's what we need most desperately in addressing the complex challenges ahead, both in space and on Earth. The conference welcome session was held in a large auditorium filled with researchers, engineers, and representatives from various space agencies and sustainability organizations worldwide. Morgan and her father took seats near the front as Dr. Martinez joined other senior NASA officials on stage. The NASA Center Director opened the proceedings with remarks about the critical importance of sustainable systems for humanity's future in space, followed by brief presentations outlining the conference themes and objectives. Morgan listened attentively, noting how frequently terms like resource efficiency, closed-loop systems, and regenerative design appeared, concepts that aligned closely with sustainable farming practices her family had employed for generations. As the formal welcome concluded, attendees moved to an adjacent reception area for networking. Morgan found herself approached by researchers from various organizations, each interested in her atmospheric water harvesting system and its potential applications in their work. Your presentation is scheduled for tomorrow morning's innovation spotlight session, Dr. Martinez informed her as she navigated the crowded reception. It's one of the most attended segments of the conference, expected audience of about 300 researchers and engineers. Morgan felt a flutter of nervousness at this information, but it was quickly displaced by excitement. 300 experts in sustainable systems would hear about her project, a project that had been dismissed as irrelevant folk wisdom just weeks earlier. As she and her father made their way through the reception, Morgan noticed a group of students entering the hall, her Westridge classmates, accompanied by Principal Richardson and Dr. Kensington. Their journey had been scheduled to allow them to attend tomorrow's presentation, but Morgan hadn't expected to see them at the evening reception. Blake spotted her first, breaking away from the group to approach with Cameron. "This place is incredible," he said, by way of greeting. Cameron's practically hyperventilating over the prototype Mars habitat models in the exhibition hall. "Can you blame me?" Cameron replied, grinning. "We're actually at Johnson Space Center. Did you see the lunar regolith experiments? They're testing soil compaction techniques for permanent moon bases." Morgan laughed at their enthusiasm, finding it impossible to maintain any lingering resentment toward classmates who were genuinely excited about the science on display. "Have you checked out the water recovery lab yet? They've adapted my harvester, designed for simulated Mars atmospheric conditions." "Seriously?" Blake's eyes widened. "That's next level. Can you show us tomorrow?" Before Morgan could respond, Principal Richardson approached, Dr. Kensington trailing behind her. Both administrators looked somewhat out of place amid NASA researchers, their formal attire contrasting with the more casual dress of the engineering community. "Morgan, there you are," Principal Richardson smiled with practiced warmth. "What an impressive venue. We're all so proud to see Westridge represented at such a prestigious event." Morgan introduced her father, noting the barely concealed surprise in Richardson's expression as James demonstrated his detailed understanding of Morgan's technical work during their brief conversation. The principal had clearly expected a simple farmer overwhelmed by the scientific environment, not an engaged partner in his daughter's innovation. "Mr. Chambers," Richardson said finally, "you must be very proud of your daughter's accomplishment." "I am," James replied simply, but not surprised. Morgan's been solving practical problems with creative thinking her whole life. NASA just happened to notice what we've always known. Dr. Kensington cleared his throat uncomfortably. We've been discussing Morgan's project with the students during our journey here. It's provided an excellent opportunity to explore how scientific principles can be applied in unconventional contexts. Morgan might have found this revisionist framing irritating a few weeks ago, but now she simply nodded with polite neutrality. Her validation no longer depended on institutional recognition. She stood in Johnson Space Center, surrounded by world-class researchers interested in her ideas. Westridge's approval or lack thereof had become strangely irrelevant. "If you'll excuse us," she said after a momentary pause, "Dr. Martinez wanted to introduce my father to some colleagues from the Sustainable Agriculture Collaboration Program." As they moved away, James squeezed her shoulder gently. "You handled that graciously." Morgan smiled. "There doesn't seem much point in holding grudges. They're here, the students are learning, and honestly, I'm just grateful for the chance to share my project with people who understand its potential." The remainder of the evening passed in a whirlwind of introductions and conversations. Morgan met researchers from international space agencies, sustainability experts focusing on terrestrial applications, and several astronauts interested in habitat technologies for future missions. With each interaction, her confidence grew, not from external validation, but from the realization that she truly had something valuable to contribute to this community of experts. Later that night, in their hotel room, Morgan reviewed her presentation notes one last time while her father watched the local news coverage of the conference. "They mentioned your presentation in tomorrow's highlights," James said, turning up the volume slightly. "The farm girl bringing agricultural wisdom to NASA, that's how they're framing it." Morgan looked up from her notes. "Is that a problem?" James considered the question thoughtfully. "Only if that's not how you see yourself. Labels can either limit us or give us strength, depending on how we relate to them." "I am a farm girl," Morgan said after a moment, "and I am bringing agricultural wisdom to NASA. But I'm also a student of science, an innovator, and someone who can translate between different knowledge systems. The label isn't wrong, it's just incomplete." James nodded, pride evident in his expression. "That's exactly right. None of us is just one thing. The trick is embracing all parts of your identity without letting others flatten you into their simplistic categories." Morgan returned to her notes with renewed clarity about how she wanted to present herself the following day, not just as a farm girl with clever ideas or a science student with technical knowledge, but as someone who could bridge these worlds and demonstrate the value in their integration. Morning arrived with a clarity that matched Morgan's sense of purpose. She dressed carefully in an outfit that reflected her dual identity, professional enough for a scientific presentation, but with subtle elements that honored her agricultural background. The small pin on her lapel, a simple wheat sheaf that had belonged to her grandfather, felt particularly significant. The Innovation Spotlight session was held in the conference center's largest auditorium, its tiered seating filled nearly to capacity as Morgan and her father arrived. Her Westridge classmates occupied 2 rows near the middle, their expressions ranging from genuine excitement to Blake and Cameron's encouraging thumbs up, to a few cases of barely concealed skepticism from students who had never taken her seriously. "Ready?" Dr. Martinez asked, meeting them at the side entrance. Morgan nodded, feeling surprisingly calm. "Ready." "You're the 3rd presenter," Dr. Martinez explained. "Each innovator has 15 minutes for presentation and 5 for questions. The session chair will introduce you." The first 2 presenters were established researchers, a hydroponics specialist from the European Space Agency and a materials scientist who had developed a new filtering membrane for water purification. Their presentations were polished and technically impressive, filled with complex data visualizations and specialized terminology. Then the session chair announced, "Our next presenter represents an important perspective in sustainable systems innovation." Morgan Chambers is a high school student whose atmospheric water harvesting system has attracted significant attention for its elegant application of traditional agricultural knowledge to contemporary challenges. Please welcome Morgan Chambers. As Morgan took the stage, she was acutely aware of the contrast between herself and the previous presenters, not just in age and credentials, but in her approach to innovation itself. Rather than attempting to minimize these differences, she decided to embrace them fully. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I'd like to start by acknowledging the origins of the system I'll be presenting today. While it incorporates principles from materials, science, thermodynamics, and hydrology, its foundation comes from generations of agricultural observation. Specifically, my grandfather's detailed understanding of dew formation patterns across varying landscapes and weather conditions." She launched her presentation with images of Sweetwater Farm during drought conditions, explaining the practical problem her system had been designed to address. Rather than overwhelming the audience with technical specifications, she focused on the thinking process that had led to her design. The integration of traditional farming knowledge with scientific principles. "What makes this system effective isn't revolutionary technology," she explained, advancing to slides showing her prototype's construction. "It's the recognition that natural processes already perform water extraction from air with remarkable efficiency. The innovation lies in mimicking and enhancing these processes using readily available materials and minimal energy input." As she demonstrated how the system worked, Morgan noticed the audience leaning forward with increasing interest. These were experts in complex technological solutions, yet they were captivated by the elegant simplicity of her approach. "The core lesson I've learned through this project," she continued, moving toward her conclusion, "is that innovation often happens at the intersection of different knowledge systems. When we create dialogue between traditional wisdom and contemporary science, between practical experience and theoretical understanding, we open possibilities that neither approach could access independently." She gestured toward the adapted version of her system that NASA engineers had constructed for Mars habitat testing, now displayed on screen. "This is what that dialogue can produce, solutions that are simultaneously grounded in generations of Earth knowledge and applicable to humanity's future beyond our planet." As Morgan concluded her presentation, the auditorium erupted in enthusiastic applause, noticeably more energetic than what had greeted the previous speakers. During the question period, she fielded inquiries ranging from technical specifications to philosophical questions about integrating different knowledge systems in scientific research. A distinguished atmospheric scientist from MIT asked the final question: "Given your experience bridging agricultural knowledge and engineering principles, what advice would you offer to established research institutions about recognizing and valuing non-traditional forms of expertise?" Morgan considered the question carefully, aware of Dr. Kensington and Principal Richardson sitting among the audience. "I believe we need to expand our definition of what constitutes valuable knowledge," she replied. "Traditional wisdom, indigenous practices and practical expertise developed outside academic contexts often contain sophisticated understanding of complex systems, even when expressed in non-technical language." She paused, gathering her thoughts. The challenge isn't just acknowledging these alternative knowledge sources, but creating genuine dialogue between different epistemological traditions. That requires humility from established institutions and recognition that credentials aren't the only measure of insight. Some of the most profound innovations happen when we create space for unexpected voices at the table. The question period might have continued well beyond the allotted time if the session chair hadn't gently intervened. As Morgan left the stage, to continued applause, she was immediately surrounded by researchers eager to continue the conversation. Dr. Martinez emerged from the crowd, beaming with approval. "That," she said decisively, "was exactly what this conference needed. You didn't just present a technology, you challenged an entire approach to innovation." For the remainder of the day, Morgan found herself in continuous conversation with conference attendees fascinated by both her water harvesting system and her perspective on knowledge integration. Several researchers invited her to visit their laboratories, while representatives from international development organizations expressed interest in adapting her design for regions facing severe water insecurity. By mid-afternoon, Dr. Martinez pulled Morgan aside for a brief private conversation. "The conference committee has been discussing your presentation," she said. "They've decided to add a panel discussion tomorrow on integrating traditional and indigenous knowledge into sustainable systems research. They'd like you to participate alongside several senior researchers who work at this intersection." Morgan's eyes widened. "They want me on a panel with established scientists?" "Not just on the panel," Dr. Martinez clarified. "They want you to help shape the discussion questions and format. Your presentation crystallized something many of us have been thinking about but hadn't articulated so clearly." As this news sank in, Blake appeared, accompanied by several Westridge classmates, including some who had previously been dismissive of Morgan's work. Their expressions now showed genuine respect, perhaps even a touch of awe. "That was incredible," Blake said simply. "You completely owned that room full of PhDs and NASA engineers." Cameron nodded enthusiastically. "The wildest part is watching Dr. Kensington's face throughout your presentation. He started out looking skeptical and ended up taking notes like a first-year student. I think you actually changed his mind about what constitutes valuable scientific knowledge." Morgan smiled, appreciating their support, but finding herself strangely detached from concerns about Westridge's approval. What mattered now was the work itself and the connections she was building with researchers who recognized its value. "Thanks," she said sincerely. "I'm glad you all got to experience the conference. There's so much amazing work happening here." Later that afternoon, James found his daughter in deep conversation with researchers from NASA's Earth Applications Division, discussing potential modifications to her system for deployment in drought-affected regions of East Africa. He waited patiently until she noticed him, then gestured toward the exit. "Thought you might need a breather," he said, as they stepped outside into the warm Texas sunshine. "You've been talking non-stop since your presentation." Morgan nodded, gratefully, suddenly aware of her exhaustion. "It's been incredible, but also overwhelming. I never expected this level of interest." They found a quiet bench in a small garden area designed for contemplation, one of several such spaces created, for researchers needing moments of reflection amid intensive work. For several minutes, they sat in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across the blue Texas sky. "You know what struck me most about your presentation," James said finally. "You didn't try to be someone you're not. You didn't adopt scientific jargon or pretend to credentials you don't have. You simply offered your genuine perspective with confidence in its value." Morgan considered this. "I realized there was no point trying to sound like the other presenters. My contribution isn't just the technology, it's the different way of thinking about the problem." "Exactly," James nodded. And that authenticity resonated with people far more powerfully than any attempt to conform would have. As evening approached, they joined a dinner for conference presenters hosted by the NASA Center director. Morgan found herself seated between Dr. Wilson, the pioneer in life support systems she'd met earlier, and Dr. Anaya Mehta, a leading researcher in sustainable architecture for extraterrestrial habitats. "I've been thinking about your presentation all day," Dr. Mehta told her as they enjoyed their meal, "particularly your points about passive systems that work with natural processes rather than against them. It parallels discussions we're having in habitat design about biomimicry and adaptive architecture." Throughout the dinner, Morgan participated in conversations that ranged from technical engineering challenges to philosophical questions about humanity's relationship with extraterrestrial environments. Despite her youth and limited formal education compared to others at the table, her contributions were received with genuine interest and respect. As dessert was served, the NASA Center director rose to offer a few remarks. After acknowledging various distinguished attendees, he turned his attention to Morgan. "I particularly want to recognize Morgan Chambers, whose presentation this morning exemplified the kind of innovative thinking we need to address the complex challenges ahead. Her water harvesting system is impressive in its own right, but even more valuable is the perspective she brings, the ability to bridge different knowledge traditions and recognize wisdom in unexpected places." He raised his glass in a toast. "To Morgan Chambers and all the boundary crossers who help us see familiar problems through fresh eyes." Later that night, as Morgan prepared for bed, she found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey from science fair rejection to NASA recognition. The validation felt wonderful, certainly, but something deeper had shifted within her, a fundamental confidence in the value of her unique perspective that no external approval could provide or diminish. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "So proud of you, sweetheart. Dad says you were amazing. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be another big day." Morgan smiled, typing back a quick response before setting her phone aside. Outside her hotel window, the lights of Johnson Space Center glowed against the night sky, a beacon of human curiosity and exploration. Tomorrow she would join a panel of experts discussing the integration of traditional wisdom into cutting-edge research. The day after, she would meet with NASA's educational outreach team to discuss potential collaborations. But the most significant outcome wasn't any specific opportunity or recognition. It was the realization that innovation thrives at the boundaries between different worlds, in the translation between traditional wisdom and scientific inquiry, between practical needs and theoretical understanding. Morgan had discovered not just her aptitude for engineering, but her gift for building bridges between knowledge systems that rarely communicate effectively. As she drifted towards sleep, Morgan felt a profound sense of purpose emerging from the chaos of recent weeks. Her future path wasn't just about developing technologies or pursuing academic credentials. It was about creating dialogue between different ways of knowing, honoring the wisdom of farmers and indigenous practitioners while engaging with the rigor of scientific methodology. In that integration lay possibilities for addressing challenges that neither approach could solve alone, from water scarcity on Earth to sustainable habitation beyond it. Morgan Chambers, farm girl and innovator, had found her calling as a translator between worlds that desperately needed to understand each other. The morning of the panel discussion dawned bright and clear. Morgan arrived early to meet with the other panelists, established researchers who had dedicated their careers to integrating traditional ecological knowledge into scientific frameworks. Rather than treating her as a token student participant, they engaged her as a colleague with valuable insights, incorporating her suggestions into the discussion structure. The panel moderator, Dr. Sofia Rodriguez from NASA's Office of the Chief Scientist, opened the session with a powerful framing. Today we explore not just the what of sustainable systems innovation, but the how and the who, specifically how different knowledge traditions can inform our work and who we recognize as holders of valuable expertise. Throughout the 90-minute discussion, Morgan articulated the lessons from her own journey, the value of practical wisdom passed through generations, the importance of observation over time rather than just controlled experimentation, and the need for scientific institutions to develop genuine humility about the limitations of their paradigms. When my project was dismissed at our school science fair, she explained in response to an audience question, it wasn't just my feelings that were hurt. It was an entire tradition of agricultural knowledge that was being devalued, observations and adaptations refined over generations of farming practice. She gestured toward her fellow panelists. The researchers here have demonstrated how traditional ecological knowledge often contains sophisticated understanding of complex systems, even when expressed in non-technical language. The challenge for scientific institutions is developing the capacity to recognize wisdom in unexpected forms and places. From their seats in the audience, Dr. Kensington and Principal Richardson listened with expressions that mingled discomfort. With dawning recognition, Morgan noticed their reactions but felt no desire for vindication. Their journey toward more inclusive understanding of knowledge was their own to navigate. After the panel concluded to enthusiastic applause, Morgan found herself approached by Dr. Wilson, who had attended despite his fragile health. "You've started something important here," he told her, his voice carrying the weight of decades in scientific institutions. "Not just with your water harvester, but with this conversation about whose knowledge we value and why. NASA needed this reminder of its roots, of the time when we recognized that innovation often comes from unexpected sources." He pressed a small package into her hands. "This is for you, something I think you'll appreciate." Later, in a quiet moment, Morgan unwrapped the package to find a small, leather-bound journal with NASA's insignia embossed on the cover. Inside, a handwritten note from Dr. Wilson explained its significance. This type of field journal was issued to early NASA engineers, many of whom came from agricultural and practical backgrounds. They recorded observations that didn't fit neatly into technical reports, but proved invaluable to our understanding of how systems behave in real-world conditions. May it remind you of the importance of bridging different ways of knowing. The final day of the conference brought formal confirmation of Morgan's summer internship with NASA's Sustainable Habitation Research Division, along with an unexpected offer, an invitation to join a new interdisciplinary working group on integrating traditional ecological knowledge into space habitat design. We're establishing this group in direct response to the conversations your presentation catalyzed, Dr. Martinez explained. You've helped us recognize a significant gap in our approach. The working group will include indigenous knowledge holders, agricultural practitioners, and other experts whose wisdom hasn't been sufficiently incorporated into our research frameworks. As Morgan and her father prepared to return home, they were met at the conference center entrance by Principal Richardson and Dr. Kensington. The administrator's demeanor had shifted notably since their arrival, the confident authority replaced by something approaching humility. "Morgan," Principal Richardson began, "we wanted to speak with you before departing. These past days have been illuminating for us." Dr. Kensington nodded, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Your panel discussion, in particular, raised important questions about how we evaluate student work and what forms of knowledge we privilege in our curriculum." He met Morgan's gaze directly. "I owe you an apology for my dismissal of your project at the science fair. I failed to recognize the value in your approach because it didn't conform to my narrow expectations of what constitutes scientific innovation. Morgan hadn't expected this acknowledgement, but she received it graciously. Thank you, I appreciate that recognition. We'd like to discuss potential changes to Westridge's science curriculum when we return, Richardson continued. Perhaps you would be willing to advise us on how we might better integrate practical knowledge and traditional wisdom alongside theoretical frameworks. The request represented a remarkable reversal. The school administrators now seeking guidance from the student whose approach they had dismissed. Morgan considered it carefully before responding. I'd be happy to contribute to that conversation, she said finally. Not just for my benefit, but for other students whose knowledge and perspectives might not fit conventional academic expectations. As they exchanged goodbyes, Morgan realized that her journey had come full circle, from rejection to recognition, from marginalization to influence. But the most profound transformation wasn't in how others perceived her work. It was in her own understanding of its value and her confidence in championing knowledge that crossed established boundaries. On the flight home, James dozed while Morgan stared out the window at cloud formations drifting over the patchwork landscape of American farmland below. From this altitude, the artificial divisions between farms, towns, and wild spaces dissolved into a single, interconnected system, much like the knowledge boundaries her work had helped bridge. In the leather journal Dr. Wilson had given her, Morgan began writing, not just technical notes about her water harvester, but reflections on what she had learned about innovation at the boundaries, about the courage to stand in her truth, even when facing dismissal, and about the responsibility that came with being a translator between different ways of knowing. By the time their plane touched down near Sweetwater Farm, Morgan had filled several pages with thoughts that would guide her path forward, a path that would lead her not just to engineering achievements, but to pioneering work in creating dialogue between traditional wisdom and scientific inquiry. In that integration lay keys to addressing humanity's most complex challenges, both on Earth and among the stars. As they drove the familiar road home, the fertile fields of Sweetwater Farm came into view, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. This land, and the knowledge it had nurtured across generations, had given Morgan not just a water harvesting system that impressed NASA engineers, but a perspective on innovation that was helping reshape how one of the world's premier scientific institutions approached complex problems. "Welcome home," James said as they turned onto the gravel driveway. Morgan smiled, the phrase carrying deeper meaning than ever before. Home wasn't just this place, but the understanding that had grown from it, the wisdom that connected generations of observers who had learned to work with natural systems rather than against them. From the porch, Sarah Chambers waved excitedly, having followed the conference updates through James's calls and texts. As Morgan embraced her mother, she felt the continuity of knowledge passed from one generation to the next, not just farming, techniques, or scientific principles, but ways of seeing and understanding the world that transcended easy categorization. "NASA wants me back," Morgan told her mother as they walked into the house together, not just for the summer internship, but to help them integrate traditional knowledge into their research framework. Sarah's eyes widened with pride. "Your grandfather would have loved knowing his observations about dew patterns might someday help design systems for Mars habitats." That evening, at the kitchen table where her water harvester design had first taken shape, Morgan shared stories from the conference while her parents listened attentively. The simple meal, vegetables from their own garden, bread Sarah had baked that morning, represented the same principles of sustainability and self-sufficiency that NASA now sought to implement in space habitation systems. "The most important thing I learned," Morgan concluded as they finished dinner, is that innovation doesn't just mean creating new technologies. Sometimes it means creating new conversations, building bridges between different kinds of knowledge that have been kept separate for too long. James nodded thoughtfully. And sometimes the most valuable contribution isn't the device itself, but the perspective that made it possible. As darkness fell over Sweetwater Farm, Morgan stepped onto the porch to gaze at the stars now emerging in the velvet sky. The same stars that had guided farmers for millennia were now the destination for humanity's boldest explorations. And the knowledge cultivated on this land, practical, grounded wisdom passed through generations, had proven relevant to that journey in ways no one could have predicted. Morgan opened Dr. Wilson's journal and began a new entry. The future belongs not to those who master a single discipline or perspective, but to those who can integrate diverse forms of knowledge with respect and creativity. My journey from rejected science fair project to NASA conference has taught me that the most powerful innovations emerge at the intersections, in the dialogue between different ways of knowing and being in the world. She paused, watching a shooting star trace a brief, brilliant path across the heavens. Then she added one final thought. My grandfather used to say that good farmers listen more than they speak, to the land, to the weather, to the plants themselves. Perhaps good innovators must do the same, listening for wisdom in unexpected places and finding connections others have missed. In that attentive listening lies the possibility of technologies that truly serve humanity's needs, both on Earth and among the stars. Closing the journal, Morgan breathed deeply of the night air, her heart full of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here and anticipation for the path that now opened before her, a path of building bridges between worlds that desperately needed to understand each other for the benefit of all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.